Good morning. It is so good to be here, and I'm always surprised to walk in and see like 5 or 6 friends, and it's just really a wonderful thing. I am Mark Heilman, and I need to see the clock. I've got 7 minutes. Are those Presbyterian minutes or are they Pentecostal minutes? I'm going to go with Baptist minutes. How's that? So I'm Mark Heilman. I'm outreach manager for the City of Bellevue, and just to know I'm coming to you today not as a staff member or as an employee of the City of Bellevue, but as a fellow Christian and as a friend of Phil and Alvin and Juana and other folks who I've met over the years. Do we have my slides up? Are we heading that way? There we go. So I don't know if you recognize this, but this is your church's new neighborhood. There is a pedestrian bridge out here that frequently will have signs up on it, and actually has a sign up on it right now over 148th, mentioning Welcoming Week and the resource fair that you all were at yesterday. But we had this sign up a few years ago, and one of the sayings that most people would know about the City of Bellevue is that Bellevue welcomes the world. Diversity is our strength. So we had this sign, and I guess one of the things that I would mention from the very start is that as we move to a new place, there are always going to be surprises. And some of those we are excited about, some of those can be a challenge. But if we can go to the next slide here, this is where you all are. This is where Anthem is now. And as I talk about our neighborhood, I'm also talking about the 5 or 6 or 8 cities that each of you all live in. I know that not everybody lives in Bellevue, but we're really talking about the region and talking about what it means to be a good neighbor. So that's where you all are located. Next slide. Phil actually mentioned this to me, and I didn't know this. I still need to go by and actually take a picture myself, but at Bellevue College, just a few blocks south here, is a piece of public art, and it's that piece. I don't even know what it's called, but next slide, there's a little plaque there. And on the plaque, it mentions is from Psalm 61, and it says, "Lord, when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I." And it was put up in April of 1976. One of kind of the hidden gems that you wouldn't know, there is an expression of the strength and eternality of our God that is at Bellevue College. Yesterday, I got to do a bus tour, which is how I met Phil the first time a year or so ago. With about 40 residents. And one of the things I absolutely love is as we're driving around, even for residents that have been here a long time, for them to learn something or see something that they didn't know was there, even though they feel like they're very familiar with the city. And I guess as you think about this neighborhood, as you think about your physical neighborhood, as you think about your school and where you work, that we are really looking with God's eyes to see who is it that has an overwhelmed heart. Each of the cities around does a human needs survey, and Bellevue and the other cities would come up with some of the very comparable things. But I love the one from Redmond because it does a summary of what people have said. And one of the things that the Redmond one says is that there are two Redmonds. One is visible and celebrated, where community members live in abundance, and the next. And then the other Redmond is hidden and stigmatized, where community members struggle to make ends meet. And we know that wherever we are, no matter what people have as physical resources, there are things that are apparent and there are things that are surprises. And then the summary, the next slide would be this, and I think this is true of every community around the world. But community members feel isolated and are disconnected. They desire genuine connection with the rest of the community. And as I talk to you all at Anthem Church Day, in many respects, I'm not giving you an introduction or a plea to do something new. Part of the reason that Phil and I connected, and I suspected that he was a Christian as I was doing that bus tour back in June of 23, were some of the things that he talked about that he was doing and that his friends were doing. So you're doing a number of those things, and I want to emphasize as well that this ministry of helping people to not be isolated and find genuine connection, doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert, whatever your gifting is. I am too much for some introverts. Introverts appreciate having kind of the relief of interacting with other introverts periodically. So this is a call for all of us. And I would refer back to Jesus talking to the young ruler in the Gospels when he said to the young ruler, you need to love your neighbor as yourself. And if you've ever raised a 16 or 17-year-old, you can kind of hear in the question of the young ruler, so who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And Jesus goes through and tells the story of what we've called the Good Samaritan. And basically Jesus says, it's everybody. And they may call on you to do things that are surprising, that you would never expect that you would do. I kind of think through what the Good Samaritan did for the man that was beaten and bleeding on the side of the road. He did for that man things I'd have to give a little bit of pause over if it was even like my first cousin. I'm a pretty compassionate, caring person. I'm kind of thinking through strategy. But in the back of my mind as well, I'm thinking, do I have a blanket in my car? Because I really don't want blood on my upholstery. And this man who didn't know the man on the side of the road bound him up, put him on his donkey, took him to an inn, and gave the innkeeper essentially his credit card. As I was growing up, the focus was, lots of times hearing that story, was on the two people that didn't do the right thing, that passed on the right side of the road. Okay, well, don't do that. But Jesus has a lot of specificity for what we are to do for our neighbor. And we're to love all of them. The call may be different at different times. It may be something that's tremendously sacrificial. It may be something that's pretty minimal. But Jesus said, to this level, for everyone, be willing to do this in a community that is isolated. During COVID, we did a survey. I think we had about 500 surveys come back and asked folks, 5 or 6 questions, how are you doing? We got back from one person just these characters, and as we understand from people that translated for us, this is what he was saying to us as the city. I'm a lonely old man. Appreciate your questions, but you need to know this. As you drive around, as you take the bus, as you bike, as you walk, see me. I'm here, and I'm lonely, and I need you. And frankly, I probably don't look like a lonely person. I'm not sure that's all he said. I'll just go with what he said. But I would say if you can take one thing from us discussing today, this is my call to ministry, is to find the lonely people and help them find connections, have a measure relationship with them, know their names so I can pray, and possibly share the gospel. But at the very least, and sometimes it's the very best, is to live the gospel for all the lonely people in our region and our culture. Next slide, please. There's a group called We Are Pistachio. Sometimes we can learn a lot about what the world needs by what the world tells us. And this is what We Are Pistachio says about themselves. We're a global community of relocating spouses committed to help each other connect, learn, and grow. Relocating can get lonely. Not only do you leave behind your old place, but friends and family too. We help you to connect with like-minded women who have been where you are and get you. Discover new friendships and find your tribe. That sounds like a church. That sounds like a church. We get you. We are just like you. As you walk in, just know we are so glad you're here. I'll tell you, I have been to lots of churches. I had a friend once, we walked into Bellevue Presbyterian. He said, Mark, I've been into a church 3 times. This is the 3rd time. He said, how many times have you been into a church? And I was like 55. And I said, I would say a real conservative estimate, I've been in church like 3,000 times. But even today, driving up to Anthem, it's like, oh, do I go in the place where it says do not enter? Is that the right place? You felt that too, right? And it's like, okay, where do I park? And this is I'm talking about me. And then walking in, am I going to see somebody that I've met before? I'm not going to remember their name. I'm hearing you all play, and it's like, I'm sure it's 9:30, and I'm here at 9:03. Am I 3 minutes late? And that's somebody that is just so joyful to walk into a church, so grateful to know each of you as individuals. But someone that doesn't know anybody here, doesn't know Phil, doesn't know Alvin, doesn't know Juana, Merwin and Ann and Sam. walking into a church is spiritual battle, even for Christians. So know that even as people come here, they are coming lonely and needy as well. So next slide. My neighborhood. Oh gosh, I almost pulled this slide. When we talk about our neighbors, when we talk about loving as ourselves, a couple of years ago, I don't get on our next door page very often, but I did once, and there was this picture here, this goofy gazebo that's at the bottom of our hill in Sammamish. And people were very upset because there is a sleeping bag and cardboard there. And the first thing that went through my head, I'm not sure if I said it out loud, but it went through my head and my heart was, well, that's not good. And I wasn't thinking of the person that slept there overnight at the bottom of our hill. I'm thinking property values and what else is coming next. I mean, those are just kind of where my mind goes to first. And I was just so convicted about that of, well, that's not good. This person slept on cement and cardboard overnight, like 4 blocks from my house. That's not good. I need to do good as a good neighbor. Next slide. I would just tell you that as we put things out as the City of Bellevue, almost always we have to limit, if we're doing interpretation, translation with headsets, how many people can come. Because if we invite the Chinese community, if Chinese speakers, if we have someone in the community that's inviting them, it's like, we've got 80 headsets, that's all we can have. We have done Welcome to City Hall a number of times. The first time we did this, 2019, we said, boy, if we get 40 people, we'll do it again. We had cut off registration at 120. It was entirely in Mandarin. And people were just glad to learn about recycling and safe water. We also learned a lot from them of how much does it cost to call 911. It's like, oh my goodness, our community thinks it costs money to get emergency help. So we had 120 people come, most exhausting event I've ever done because you're just trying to pick up on what people's language ability is as they're walking in. But as folks were leaving, I talked about 90 of the 120. And one gentleman came to me and said through his granddaughter, there are 3 generations of the family there. So she said, he's saying and wants you to know, I finally feel like I have a home again. So as Phil asked, what is my call? My call is that people feel safe enough to tell us as individuals, as Christians, what they really need. And then through relationship, through the Word of God, through the Spirit of God, to point them toward, you don't need to be lonely. You don't need to feel like you don't have a home. You can know that you have an eternal home with Jesus Christ. Next slide. So my neighborhood, we did an event. Faye mentioned that she's come to Cultural Conversations in the past. We did a Cultural Conversations at City Hall in March. And the people that spoke at that, who came from around the world, said, we want to get together again. We want to get together again. So a couple months after that, we had folks from 5 different countries. We went to one of their homes and had this dinner. And then we did the same thing again at our house in July. And they've reached out and it's like, when are we getting back together again? It's like, you don't know what my calendar looks like. Plan something and I'll see if I can wedge it in. But I guess what I'm saying is there are people like you that want to know your Jesus. They want to know why you have hope. They want to know what you fear, what you have doubts about, but they need Jesus. Final slide. I guess 2 more slides. Opportunities. As you see a house that's for sale in your neighborhood, pray for who's going to move in there. I mean, we pray intensely when we're buying the house or renting the apartment. We want to get to the place that we can afford best for our income. And we want to be in the place where God calls us to a particular neighborhood. And we're praying for who's going to be our neighbor, like our physical neighbor. If there's something that's happening in your neighborhood, again, even if you're the introvert, if you get there half an hour early and help set up, you've got friends. People appreciate folks that help. Final slide. So I don't know what this event was a couple, 3 years ago, but this is Anthem somewhere, doing stuff with a mural in the background. I would just say, well done, Anthem. Continue with what you're doing. Be willing to be surprised about this neighborhood, about your neighborhood, and most importantly, love your neighbors as yourself, up to the point of being risky with your credit card. Good boundaries, be wise, but it is the example Jesus said, is risk your vehicle, risk your finances, trust me, and look for the lonely people in your neighborhood that desperately need and are looking for a shepherd that they can't name yet. Very grateful to be with you all today. Thanks for the invitation, Phil.